For this video, I will be talking about the generation of the map, the character movement, and how it all sort of ties together. So to start off, this is my code for creating the levels. It was a really simplistic piece of code that I just wanted it to work, and that was a huge thing with this part because as I was so time constrained, the fact that I'd already given up on a project just before this, so I only had about 8 weeks left at this point. So I needed to get code out quickly and reliably, so I didn't want to add any flares or flashy bits. This led me to creating this, and it's very, very simplistic. So at the start, all it does is it gets the camera and it gets the level placement. The camera was more important for when I was doing it beforehand, where I needed something to activate a trigger. But towards the end, I wasn't even using the camera for much at all, because all it really needed to do was set the level X on the camera, which would then just purely set the X on here, which I will explain later on. So here we can just see what kind of happens. So to start off, every time there's no enemies on the screen, so it finds all the game objects with the tag enemy. So for example, if we go into Unity and we just load it up, we can see that the level spawned. So what's actually happening here, I'll try and explain this a bit more visually, is that it's placing this bottom block here, which is what we stand on, it's placing an enemy, and it's placing the level that comes along with the enemy. So if we now destroy that enemy quickly, just use, it's just that one. There we go. So as we can see here, it's tagged an enemy. If we destroy that, then hit play, the next level will spawn. That is all due to this. So it finds all the game objects with the tag enemy, and if this equals 0, because this is now creating an array for it, so every frame is creating a new array which is checking for all the enemies. So as soon as there's no enemies on the screen, it's saying, okay, the array length is 0, therefore let's do this. This then sets a vector 2 and a float, which is a random range, and if this random range is less than 50, it will then spawn a chest onto the next level. This allowed me to spawn the loot in a place where you still have to go and get it, so there's still that risk element there. The new vector 2 is to place the next level. This is where it needs to be placed so that it still sits exactly right, because even though everything's set to 0, 0, that is the center of the level. For example, if we hit play again, the center of the level is just here, and that's 0, 0. So the entire thing is about 1.04 tall, which means half that, and we get 0.52. So this needs to be at 0.52 to allow this to be continuously produced at 0, 0. While I could have made it upwards and set it all so the bottom was 0, 0, it seemed like a lot more work at the time, and as I was saying before, I just wanted something that I could constantly get out and just work like this, so that there was no extra faff involved around it. As I was saying before, I was very time constrained, so I just wanted everything working. That's about it for the level placement. All it does then is it places a level from this. So the levels create goes up, because the more levels created affects the heart enemy type by making more, but I'll go into that detail when I talk about the AI. It also updates the player's component here, which is character movement. This allows it to say how many levels you've done, which is displayed in the top left. Although it doesn't work too well at the moment because it needs to be ran at a 1920 by 1080p resolution, because I couldn't quite get it right. But if we go onto the scene, we can see up here that it tells you the level, your current weapon, and the health. Obviously it needs to continuously create to the right. So for this, the level placement is increased by what it is at the moment, plus 2.24f. This is because that's how much it needs to move across to be absolutely perfect, so that they just connect nicely. It will then instantiate a level piece, which is random, which is allowing me to have these constantly changing things, so that no two run-throughs of the game will be the same. And it just chooses a random piece between 0 and the amount of level pieces. This is so that if I ever wanted to come back to my game, I could just add more levels to it, and they would just run off one after the other, and there'll be no problems adding them in, as long as they're all set up correctly, of course. This is about it for my level generation. As I said, it was a very simplistic method of doing it, but it worked really nicely, and it just worked, and it was really nice. As you can see around it though, there's lots of green text. These are things that I tried and it didn't work quite right. For example, this was the one that I was using when the camera was setting it off. So here, as soon as it exits, sorry, it will then place a level. It will just generate that. But it just didn't feel quite right, and it felt very forced. And it also meant that the player could just run right and constantly spawn these levels and never complete anything, which to me feels a little bit like cheating. Next, we'll be talking about the character. Oh, and before I move on to that, these are all the different things. This was just for me to be testing. This is just my notes for while I was coding, just so I had some kind of reference. The character reference in my eyes was possibly one of the best bits of code I wrote for this. There was lots of things going on, and I'll go through them bit by bit, of course. So first of all, let's talk about the variables. First of all, I needed a whole bunch of balls for this because there is just horrendous amounts of if statements, and I really dislike how I used a lot of them, but as they work so perfectly and I didn't know of a much cleaner way to do it at the time, this is the way I went with it. So I've got grounded, which was all to do with my jumping, bullet cooldown, which is all to do with shooting, and then these are all my spell effect checks. I could have had up to 6, but unfortunately I ran out of time before I could add 2 more in, so there's only 4. The protofloat speed is purely so I could set the speed of the character so I could adjust it in the script. I didn't want to have this public because I didn't think I was ever going to get a chance to change the speed correctly throughout another script. Then these are just the game objects which are attached to it, so the bullet, the gun, the text, and the James bomb. These are all different parts. So the James bomb is a spell effect. The text, the text is what you see on the screen, so that displays the health, the level you're on, and the items you have equipped. The gun is where the bullets are instantiated, so I needed them to have the transforms. The integers are quite simply the jump height. This is how much force will be added to it, so it can go up and then come down using gravity. It then uses health and levels done, which I explained in the level generation. Public transform EOB stands for end of barrel. This is needed for the instantiation of the bullets. That's actually where they come out of. The public game object, this is just the spell effects. This was an array of spell effects that I can add in. So the more spell effects I add in, the more that can come out of the chest, etc. And the string is purely so that I could do this bit here, which sets them all nicely. So to start off, the void start, this sets the health and the speed. These were perfect. I didn't want to use the max health, which is 30, because I feel like the player should have some risk at the beginning, and starting with max health has always been a bit boring in my eyes, because it means that there's nothing else for you to reach to. The James CD, this was for the James bomb, which is one of the spell effects. I'll get to that in a second. So here in the void update, if health is less than or equal to 0, it restarts the level. I wanted to add in a death scene and have the whole game over bit, but I ran out of time and I just needed something that would just do it quickly. Unfortunately, I was having quite a few of my scripts in this because I was so pressured for time and I just couldn't think of a way to do it at the moment, so I just almost cheated and just did it how I would have done if I was in a games jam, for example. However, I can kind of see how I do this though, because most of my experience from coding in pressured environments is at games jams, so I've never really had to do it before. Here we have the different string sets. So if the spell effect 1 has been unlocked, it sets the string for the spell effect 1 to diagonal shooty, and so on, random shooty, healy, and bomb. These are just some of the names that I came up with because it allowed me to give the player some information about it while not giving it away. And this is something that I really like about roguelikes, is the fact that there's the information out there on the internet or places like that, but if you went into the game just head on, you wouldn't know what the different items did, and you get to find out for yourself. So all these strings, for example, these all get sent to the text component, which tells you your health. /n, by the way, stands for the new line break, which gives us the effect of this, where it says new text, then AAAA. It tells you how many levels you've done, the current weapon you have, which is always going to be pistol. If I was going to go back to this, I would have added more weapons in, allowing me to have a bit more variation, especially with what came out of the chests. It then tells you if you've unlocked the spell effect 1, 2, 3, and 4 by printing these in there instead. So at the moment they're just blank. If you unlock them, then they would be true, and then they would say these things. These are exactly what they do. So if spell effect 3, it then starts the coroutine heal power. This one heals you up to 25 health, and then goes away. It's one of the few items you can pick up multiple times, and it will keep on running. Spell effect 4 was possibly one of the most broken effects, and if I go into here, you can see it in action. So see, give me a second, I just need to find it. So spell effect 4. You press E, and it places this, and it fires off to the place, and oh my god, that's a lot of lag. So this is because I'm recording, so it doesn't work quite right. But as you can see, it fires out all of these bullets, and it catches the thing. There you go. Sorry about that lag, by the way. It's purely because I'm recording and my computer can't quite handle it. But I will get onto the spell effects a bit more later. Spell effect 3 was the healing. We can demonstrate that as well right from the get-go. So spell effect 3. You can't quite see it though. If I go into the scene, you can see the health there. In fact, you can see the health here as well, which is probably a better way of showing it. We activate spell effect 3. The health very slowly starts to go up. If we then change the health once it gets to 25 to say 10, and we activate it again, it goes up again, and this is showing us that it can be done over and over again, so if we keep getting out of the chest it still works, whereas the other ones are single time unlocks. Here we're getting the rigid body. The rigid body is what's controlling the jumping of the character. So again, if we go into here, we can see that the character can jump, but it also goes down. This is thanks to the rigid body and having a gravity scale. So all it's doing is simply adding a force upwards and then falling down to the gravity scale. However though, I don't know if, how the best way to describe this. So if you go right at the top, we can see that the character, I'm not very good at my game, the character sort of sinks into the platforms. This is due to me, or at least I believe this is due to me using really small scales. And this was one of the biggest problems with my game, was the fact that I couldn't get the sprites right straight away. So everything has to be awkwardly scaled, which means everything is very small. And I don't think Unity's collider system is that precise where it can do these pinpoint precision. So I think if they were a lot bigger, pardon me, it would just work so much nicer, because it could actually detect the collisions and there wouldn't be this horrible sink when you hit the ground. You wouldn't sometimes fall to the bottom of the earth, etc, etc. So here we can actually see it's getting the rigid body. So if it's grounded, which means it's touching the ground, the way this gets set is through the grass. So if the grass is on all of the platforms, it's one of the few scripts that's on almost every object, or at least it's on all of the platforms. So we can see grass. Grass is set on here. Sorry, it's on the big one here. It's on grass. So once the player is on it, it sets grounded to true. But as soon as the player leaves a platform, it sets it to false. This means that as soon as you jump, you can't jump again, and you can only jump once you hit a platform. And here we can see grounded also equals false as soon as you hit space. I did it twice purely because if one of them fails, the other one will always work. And this gave me a little bit more. It was just me being conscious of the fact that one of them might not always work, and it just felt right to add in that extra layer. It then simply adds a force of the transform up, so it's going upwards, times the jump height. So the jump height is up here. It's in the integers, like I said, jump height. We can set that in the inspector so I could change it quickly so we could get the right number. talked about the text. This is another spell effect. This one instantiates a spell effect. So spell effects are two things that I made. There's spell effect 1, which is here. Sorry. It's these two things. And these both have bullet scripts on them. So this one, I'll just hit play so I can demonstrate what it does. So spell effect 1, and this shoots 2 bullets diagonally, but only in one direction. I added this in to make the game a little bit harder still because it was a very good item, and when I had it firing from both sides, it just made it too simple and there was no real risk to the player anymore. Here we can see the very simplistic controller. So there's DNA to move because you can't move up or down obviously, and S makes you fall down the platform. I did it this way because this is how, again, I've always done it. This is how I learned how to do it. It's a really good way of doing it in a 2D environment, especially because there's so little that can go wrong. All you're doing is simply telling it to move to the right, or telling it to move to the right, or telling it to move to the left. We have to use minus vector 2 right because there is no vector 2 left. Unfortunately, you just have to use the inverse. As I was saying, it's a really good way. There's nothing you can go wrong with it at all, really. I've used it in all of my 2D games and it's always worked. My sprite renderer.flipx. This is so that the sprite turns left and right when you're hitting the respective button. So for example, if we're moving to the left, it looks to the left. If we're moving to the right, it looks to the right. Here, this is how we shoot. So if the bullet's cooldown is not on cooldown, then we can shoot a bullet. The bullet is shot. So the bullet is just called bullet. This is the game object. The EOB.position, this is the transform. This is where the bullet is going to be fired from. And the quaternion identity is the rotation. We just want this the same as the gun because it doesn't change at all. Also, as it's a circular object, it wouldn't really matter what rotation we used. We then also change where the gun is so it's facing the way it's shooting. The gun, we get the component, we flip that as well. We also transform the position so it's on the other side, because if you look at the character, the gun is here, but if we flipped it, all that would do is that the barrel would then be about here and the handle would be here. So we need to flip this completely onto the other side. We then get the component on the bullet script called right from the bullet, and that will then fire off to the right. Obviously it's different from the left, but it's exactly the same code. This is the spell effect 1. Obviously you can see that the left arrow doesn't have it, that's because we are not using it. So the objects from it, we're making an array for them all. We get the component in children called bullet script, and then for all the items, so for this is just simple for, so we create an integer called I, and then while I is less than the object's.length, I increases by 1 and it does this. This means that it can only do it to the 2, so there's no null reference exceptions at all. Bullet cooldown is then false, so this cannot be run again until we invoke bullet cool, which is just, need to find it quickly, here, which simply just sets bullet cooldown to true, so then we can fire again. This is the heal power, this is the spell effect I was talking about, which heals you up. It's very simplistic. All that happens is that while the health is less than 25, health is increased by 1, and then we wait for seconds, 1F. So this is just waiting for a single second. This is so we can go through the platforms when we hit down. So I will show you what I mean by this. So we go here, we hit S, and we fall down the platform. This is so that the players can constantly just have lots of maneuverability around the map, which is especially useful when you're trying to dodge the bullets and things of enemies. Take damage, this is so we can take damage. So all it does is it gets our health and it sets it to health, take away the damage that we took. This is on the enemy bullet script, and I'll go into that more when I'm talking about the AI. This is the heart up. This again is another AI function, and I'll go more into that. Going through this, you can see not too much green text. The green text is what I ended up using. This was one of my biggest game choices though, and I got this idea from Risk of Rain, and it was the idea where you can't shoot up and down. I chose to do this because it allowed me to inflict another restriction onto my game that wouldn't affect the player a whole bunch, but would affect how they played a lot. Because if they were able to shoot up and down, this means that a lot of the enemies I created would suddenly become very easily, especially the totem pole, which relies on you having to face it to be able to do damage to you. So while this almost seems like I was being lazy by shooting left and right, it actually put a lot more strain. It puts a lot less strain on me, sorry, to create the AI, which meant that I could create AI that were based around this mechanic, which made the game feel more full in my opinion. This is the bullet script. So these are still on here, even though they can never be called for. I just left them in here just in case I wanted to go back to it. So right, all this does is shoot it to the right, so it sets right to true, and in update, if right is true, it transforms to the right. If right isn't true, it translates to left because left is true. When it enters a collider, which is an enemy, it destroys the game object. This means if it hits a platform, it won't destroy itself, which I actually played around the idea of having it, if it hit any collider, it would destroy itself. But after playing around and having a few other people play test it, it just didn't feel right to include that. Going back to the character movement and especially the spell effects, after having a few people playtest them, I started to get a feel for which ones were the good ones and which one were the bad ones. The bad ones were the random shooty and the healy. So these are the ones that I put in the most common chests and the second most common chest. The diagonal shooter was so broken because all you needed to do was simply line up your shot and then just spam it, and you will hit the totem pole, the hearts, all of that extremely, extremely easily.